reference, I just want to go through and like talk about weapons, like where they stand in terms of what is being viable and what isn't. In terms of like where stuff stands right now, I think it's pretty easy to say that the most OP weapon in the game is Spear. The main thing that Spear has going for it is that it has really, really high survivability, really, really high base damage in terms of a modifier. So it's on on a tanky scale, it's like a 10 out of 10. Like it's one of the tankiest weapons in the game. You can't like it doesn't have disengage ability, but you just gain so much fortify with it. It's super super hard to deal with. On like the base damage scale, like in terms of what it is with its class inherently, it's also 10 out of 10. Like this is like one of the best in the game. And the only thing that this kind of lacks is Empower, which Empower for this weapon is like you'll get to maybe 20% inherently off its kit, and it's the main thing it struggles with. But if you can compensate for that, it's just super, super good. And Jasper will be fixed next patch. So yeah, like you run it with Jasper, it fixes it. Some people run it with either like Empowering Toast, or they'll go for Shirking Empower or something like that, or Empowering Breaker, but that's kind of forcing it. So like it basically has the tankiness, the damage, the Empower going for it. So people just play it in heavy. It does as much damage as some light builds, as some medium builds. You know, hits for a solid like 3 to 5k per auto if everything is done correctly, and people have to ward super, super heavily towards this class. And I don't think there's anything that's really close to Spear right now in terms of viability. This is the first time in New World history where I think this weapon hasn't been countered super well. In the past, this weapon was countered by BB, and BB was also considered to be like one of the best weapons in the class. Problem is with BB, I'm probably going to ignore this last category, but BB is like, if there's an average, it's like below the average, like not a secondary weapon. Like, I don't want to, like, I just took this off of Tier Maker. I didn't make it, but like, I'd say this is like the worst weapon in the game right now. It's used as an offhand, and that's basically it. And it's not viable outside of that. Otherwise, well, actually, I think Hatchet's slightly worse. But BB is like the second worst weapon in the game. It sucks because it went from like being one of the best to one of the worst, because it used this T2 gem thing that was not mitigated by PvP damage stuff. So when AGS introduced that PvP damage scaling, they didn't adjust BB properly, so BB's left in the spot where it doesn't do that much damage. Are you just playing OPR, bro? Yeah, we're just doing OPR. I was just bored, so I decided to like make this tier list thing and like kind of talk about some of this stuff, because I feel like it hasn't been adjusted in a while, or hasn't been addressed. Like if you look at the roster that we have, like I think we have like 12-ish spears, and this is like roughly a month ago. And then like from that point forward, we've just been adding spears. Like we've been cutting builds. Like why wouldn't we just go spear there? Like spear is just better. Like it doesn't matter what the build is. It feels like you need to have a certain amount of Great Axe Warhammers, but even the Great Axe Warhammers are countered by spear at this point, because spear, you go for thwarting counter. And then it has 42% extra damage versus a target with grit, and then Great Axe Warhammer always has grit, so it counters that too. So it's like, well, I don't know what Spear can't do. It's just stupid. And BB used to be the counter, because Spear has like longish animations, so you just catch an animation, you blow it up with BB, right? But BB doesn't do enough damage to consistently blow up Spear anymore. With artifacts like Void Darkplate that came out, BB effectively just can't force out a Spear and actually gets countered by Spear now. So Spear is effectively counterless. People ask me, like, what do you go to counter a spear? I don't have a clear answer. Trap or musket does okay versus it, but if you don't land the trap, you're dead. And, like, that and war is not super viable whatsoever. I don't think spears counter hammer at all, but it's too easy for a disruptor to ignore a bruiser. Yeah, I guess Warhammer does a decent job versus spear, but like that's kind of the main thing. You could also weapon a swap break the trap. Yeah. Like, because you have 300 dex with this build, because you usually go for 100 strength, 300 dex, and then 200 con. So you're tanky enough with the 200 con, you don't really need more than that. You don't have grit, so there's like some counter ability there, but then people run stone form, so it doesn't matter even. So like Spear is like the crown jewel of New World right now, just best in slot basically in every single mode. Doesn't matter if it's OPR, 3v3, war, etc. Like Spear is just goated. Firestaff used to be in a spot where it was like maybe OP. I would argue that it's still, for the majority of game modes, is maybe OP, but within the war situation, it's like, it's very good to average. Like, it's actually, I'll use this bottom thing. So like as in like the best, maybe OP, very good, average. We'll stick to this. But this is not a secondary weapon thing. Is kind of weird. Like Firestaff, I think is like a little bit above average, but like it's not like very solid right now. It's also countered by Spear. But it's good within OPR because there's not access to consistent heals. In War, it's still used a little bit. People run this with Finisher as a rapier build, and as a Nuki DPS, and they also run it with BB as like kind of a passive disease build. That passive disease build has been basically not obliterated by nerfs, but I wouldn't say it's super sexy anymore with the nerfs. It is probably the most hated build of all time in OPR. It's very good if you're not good at the game to play, but like I would say Spear just overall does a lot more to it, or does a lot more generally than Firestaff in most game modes. In terms of Lifestaff, some people I think would argue that Lifestaff is weak. With some of the more recent changes, I think with Bile Bomb, it's going to get weaker. But with the recent pest changes to where pest is not being consistently slotted anymore and everyone's just going Spear, I think Lifestaff is still like on the stronger side compared to other games that I've played. As in, like, if you don't have a Lifestaff versus having a Lifestaff, it's a very, very big difference, and it feels mandatory to have a Lifestaff. Versus, like, and within other games, like, I feel like it's like more of a passive heal thing that like isn't super significant. In New World, they just heal you from 0 to full very consistently without a lot of skill, or like a timing mechanic like you've seen with Ashes of Creation, where it's like you have to precast the heal for 10 seconds to get a heal that heals them up to full HP or something like that. Like I think Lifestaff just is able to pump out a lot of heals very, very quickly compared to other games. And even though it's been effectively nerfed heavily with the somewhat recent disease changes, I still think Lifestaff resides in like a very OP stance. I think Lifestaff is slightly underpowered. The clap nerf was really stupid. 50 meters would have been fine. I feel like clap was dumb. Like you kind of like between walls and stuff. Like it was so stupid. Like now they actually have to play close, which helps out a bit, and they have to be in light, right? So they're super squishy. But you still look at like war statistics, and within a war with like roughly 22 healers, like each healer has an average deaths in a good war of 2 to 3 tops. Most wars are between 0 to 1 death per healer. Like they're still super, super survivable, and the Lifestaff helps out a lot with that. And the other thing that helps out a lot with that is Rapier, where Rapier I would still say is like pretty OP as a secondary. It's still used with Lifestaff, still used with bow, used with musket. It's like the go-to secondary, and like you can't really get around that. Even used with Spear now, to the point where Rapier is actually used basically as much as Spear. And even though it's not a primary, like this is like kind of a mandatory weapon to have within War still as a like util perspective. I think Rapier Spear tier, yeah, like it's really like you just kind of can't get around it. Like people have tried to make like Lifestaff like Ice Gauntlet work, and it works nichely, but it doesn't work all the time. Ice Gauntlet's a good counter for Spear in particular, but it's weak versus Greatsword. But it's just like does not feel very fair. Is Spear Rapier best for Bruiser deleting? That's the build that people run for Bruiser deleting. Yeah, they go Rapier Spear typically. Some people within NA like to go for Spear BB and use Pestilence to get 1 extra dot tick, which is 10% more damage. But that's like the only time where that build's really used, and even then I think it's outclassed by other variants. Like BB is a good util weapon at this point, but it's not used other than that, and it's a worse util weapon than Rapier is because Finisher just gives you bonus damage as well. Thoughts on the Ice Gauntlet Rapier? Very, very fun, not super effective. In terms of where Ice Gauntlet is right now, like I think Ice Gauntlet is somewhere between very good for the current meta, but then average overall. Like in the current meta, Ice Gauntlet is solid because it's very spear heavy. There's not a lot of great axes, or sorry, not a lot of great swords, and great sword counters Ice Gauntlet. So this is just like a way to kind of get around that. Yo, the Laboratory Maniac, thank you for the gifted subs. I appreciate that, and I'm sure other people will as well. Don't have to deal with all the ads. Well, not that there's many, but I appreciate that. But Ice Gauntlet, like, very good with IGVG in particular, very good with Firestaff, but it's worse than Rapier even still. People stop running Firestaff with Ice Golem for Firestaff Rapier, and then they've been dropping their con lower to get more ints so they can actually do a significant amount of damage. Because if you go for higher amounts of con, then you do just do less damage. So it's like been like a thing where it's like kind of fallen down, I think, a little bit in terms of its power, but it's still like very, very good in the current meta. It's just not consistently played because Rapier is easier to play and typically will allow you to do more damage than an Ice Gauntlet will. Void Gauntlet right now is really interesting. The amount of slots of a Void Gauntlet has decreased as of recent. It's gone from like 10-ish down to only like 6 per war, and that's it. In terms of OPR, it's basically absent. In terms of 3v3, it's basically absent. I would say Void Gauntlet is sort of like an average weapon right now. It's like, it's mandatory in a sense because it's the only weapon that can get rid of effects. And it's like, that's very nice utility, but the problem is if you run Void Gauntlet, you have to run Mag Gloves. And if you run Mag Gloves, you aren't running Void Darkplate, you're not running a defensive artifact, and you just get hunted down. Like in high level wars, like people just look for a VG and they'll just target them no matter where they are, and they typically die because they just don't have enough survivability with just Ice Gauntlet itself. And I would say that Ice Gauntlet with the IGVG kit is honestly more impactful than Void Gauntlet at this point. But Void Gauntlet is still like a good weapon and still mandatory to, you know, give your army in power, land more disease, strip buffs. But I would say IGVG is like less of a carry class now than it has been in the past. Like there was a meta like maybe 2 months ago where IGVG was a very heavy carry class, and now I think it's to the point where IGVG, you know, if the class just disappeared overnight and it got replaced with like Spear Ice Gauntlet, like it would probably be fine and like no one would really notice. But Void Gauntlet is still like nice to have as a clump utility for certain circumstances, as well as stripping bruisers. So this is like kind of a necessary evil at this point where you need it for the utility, but other than that, like Void Gauntlet's not really used, if that makes sense. Fair enough, survivability wise, Void Gauntlet's abysmal in wars. Yeah, like they die a lot, and it's why it's not used in other modes either. How much dex should a Firestaff Rapier be using, if any? Usually you go full int. You go 400 to 500 int. Or 400 to 450 int, I would argue, and then you do Rapier. It's just complete nuker, like, Firestaff build. And you should be able to hit around 4 mil damage with that consistently. Sword and Shield. This is between the best and maybe OP. I would argue it's in the maybe OP state. The main thing that this allows you to do is it allows heavy players and medium players to actually hunt light players because Leaping Strike's tracking is just so stupid. And it inherently makes Disruptor viable. If Sword and Shield lost its tracking on Leaping Strike, then I don't think Disruptor builds will be nearly as strong as they are right now. And you see like a meta right now where you're seeing like roughly 10 to 12 Disruptors, which is the highest you've ever seen for that kind of class in any circumstance in the past. Life Taker is good, but you have to play like a rat. Yeah, for Musket, it's good with Musket in particular, but I think for other than that, it kind of falls off. Like you're just like so squishy. But Sword, you know, very good from a tank perspective. I would argue very good from a disruptor perspective. You see a lot of these slots in the war. I just wouldn't quite put it on the same tier as Spear and Rapier. I think it's solid, but I don't think it's like OP by any means. Hatchet. Not used at all. I don't think there's much more to say about it. It doesn't have survivability compared to other classes at this point. Like the Rapier just feels like it's better. The Rapier has better damage utility. I think the new Hatchet will be interesting because extending debuffs is like relatively good for a few weapons, and it has like decent survivability. It's just not as good because the animation cancels that were present with Berserk and your throws got nerfed, basically removed. So it's like not nearly as crazy right now, but it might be good in the future. New Hatchet might make Hatchet complete with a Rapier as a utility. That would be kind of crazy to see like that, but like Hatchet definitely has better tracking on the PTR than it does on live. The Hatchet artifact is going to make Hatchet broken. 25% longer SNS stuns is absolutely insane. I don't know what they're thinking. Yeah, it's in a weird spot where it's like it's not used right now, and the next patch is going to be between maybe OP to, well, I don't think it's going to be best, but I think it's going to be like maybe OP to very good. Like it's going to be jumping up a lot because that new artifact with Hatchet's going to really push the class as a whole. This is controversial. Great Axe, don't think is well. I don't think it's controversial. I don't think it's like maybe OP or the best. I would argue Great Axe is average right now. Like I think Crippling Reap is good. I think Charge is decent. I don't think Gravel is super useful in most circumstances. I think Maelstrom is inconsistent at best right now and is fixed on the PTR, so it's a little bit better. But like the weekend just doesn't do enough for it. Like the main thing with Great Axe is because of Reap. Like Reap itself maybe bumps us up a tier, but most Great Axes aren't running Reap. Great Axe is either the best or very good. It's definitely not the best. Like literally all hunters playing Great Axe. Not like within OPR, yeah, but within War, I think it falls off even more. Like I think this is the worst Great Axe meta we've had in the history of New World because it's countered by Spear. A charge plus Bloodlust plus Reap is what you want for hunting. Yeah, like that build is like very, very strong, and it's present within OPR. It's just not present at all within War because Spear inherently counters it for the most part because you have access to Grit usually with that, and Spear just wins the trade. Problem is Bruiser does not threaten anyone outside a point. Yeah, which is why like I'm debating between very good and average. I think it's like it's in a weird spot where I think it's like probably in a very good, but like very, very bottom of very good. And you can't replace Great Axe with any other weapon for Bruiser as a clump, so the weapon's still S tier for War. I mean, people have been trying to, and it's actually been working better than I would think it would. But no, it's still like strong. It's just like the weakest it's ever been in the past. Like I think that people are still like it's been this way for probably 2 or 3 months, but people have been trying to figure out ways to drop more and more bruisers for more and more spears, just because spear is that good. And I would not be surprised like one day to see, hey, we're gonna replace one of the clump players with a spear, and they're gonna play in the clump fight, and we're just gonna do one Great Axe. Like I wouldn't be super surprised. There's literally no weapon that can replace Great Axe since launch. I think it can be replaced if it's like a less clumpy meta, or if people just don't die in clumps consistently. Like Spear, I think will generate more pressure than Great Axe, but Great Axe is still like strong. I just don't really think it's as sexy as it has been in the past. Maybe I'm like overreacting to put it down on very good because end of the day it's still a 10 slaughter, so it's like it's still strong because of Maelstrom, but it feels so weak. Like Maelstrom's enfeeble like doesn't even work right now on live like half the time. They address it on the PTR. On the PTR, you can't even do auto in the Maelstrom, so it just kind of feels weird there too. It feels like Great Axe is just a someone throws the clump and everyone in the whole entire army, as in 20 people, you press all their buttons and then 1 to 2 people die and that's it. It's like it feels really shitty. And it makes me really not want to put it in maybe OP, to be honest. Reap is like very, very good for it though right now, since the crippling leap is no longer conditional. But like it feels really, really shitty compared to what it's been in the past. Like if the left of here is like the best of each tier, like Great Axe is definitely on the far right. Honestly, IG is probably better than Firestaff in that same regard. And then Blunderbuss is better than Hatchet. And Spear is better than Rapier. I mean, that weapon for Bruiser is mainly used, but it's used for Assassins too, and what weapon is a very good spot in my opinion. Yeah. It's not like OP, but it's viable, I guess. PTR, though, is going to be interesting for it. Because that one bug gets fixed, but then the other bug where you can't auto-cancel arises, so it has even less clump damage as a whole. See, I would argue that Warhammer is almost better than Great Axe in some regards, but it's just, like, in terms of, like, the actual damage output, but Warhammer is just used less, fundamentally. I think Warhammer is more effective than Firestaff right now, though, and as a whole, but Ice Gauntlets a little bit better than it. Tons of weapons have animation problems in the PTR, not just Great Axe. Yeah, so maybe that will get fixed. Warhammer heavies are just, they bonk. Like, they're just so good. Light attack's not as good. Your stun utility with Warhammer is kind of unmatched. It's still a strong weapon. Flow cleanse might be a problem, or might be a problem with Warhammer. The cleanse doesn't prevent the stuns, per se. At least I don't believe it actually does, because it doesn't feel like it does. Or you still get staggered with them anyway, so it's still like kind of effectively a soft stun. In a world without Rapier, Warhammer would be God tier. Yeah. I tend to agree with that. But, you know, Rapier does Rapier things. I mean, with the new movement passive, Rapier gets effectively worse because you can't ever Rapier evade directly backwards. So if you're running a Rapier, you're at a disadvantage because you can't use the movement passive. Because if you Rapier directly backwards, you create the most distance possible, which is kind of interesting. Rapier feels insane on the PTR. It does, but you can't use evade, right? Because evade with the movement settings, like, shit. But on live, Warhammer tracking is really strong. PTR tracking doesn't really seem insane. That's going to be interesting too. If your heavies don't connect with Warhammer, I think it falls off a lot. But right now, like, Warhammer heavies are itself making it so people have to go strike protection. Half heavy into armor breaker is so strong with Onyx. Yeah, that thing is just deletes. We got 2 weapons, and then we gotta do flail, and we gotta do what do you call it? And greatsword, which aren't on this list, and we'll just write those in. Bow is weird because if you don't know the mechanics of a bow, it's an average build. To like most OPR bows are just like, it's just shitty. But if you know the animation cancels, which they say to fix, and then create a new one every single patch, so there's some other animation cancel, like they said they took out the Rain of Arrow one, and it just still works. If you know that, like, bow becomes like to a very good status. Like, I wouldn't say maybe OP, but it's like very solid. Probably more effective than Warhammer in a lot of circumstances, but it's like, if you don't know the mechanics, I don't think it really works that well. I think you could still backwards evade with freeform camera. We were trying that. It wasn't really working super effectively. Firestaff level, I'd say, with mechanics. Yeah, it's around there. I think it's a little bit more effective than Firestaff because you could just pump out more DPS with the mechanics. But if you don't know the mechanics, it's worse than that. Is it better than Warhammer or not better than Warhammer right now? I think it's generally better than Warhammer. Like, every game mode except for War, and then in War, it's probably a little bit worse. Definitely not better than Warhammer. Doesn't bows often not get slotted? Yeah, there's only like 3 slots for bow. It's not many. But it still feels strong, if that makes sense. Like, even though there's not a lot of players that play it, the players that do play it have an impact. I don't have a problem with the range power level. I just think it's hard to make secondary weapons for range classes and healers when Rapier exists. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, that's what I think they're trying to do, where they're adding passives from other weapons so you don't just always go Rapier. But there's no reason to, like, not go Rapier for a lot of these weapons. Musket's in a weird spot where I think a lot of people consider it to be really shit, but I think it's actually, like, pretty good. But you have to have the right person playing it. It's like one of those weapons where it's like, most muskets, it's between average and, like, not viable, and then some of them it's a lot better. I would say it's a bit better than Void Gauntlet in most game modes, though. Yo, the Laboratory Maniac, another 5? Jesus. Thanks, man, so much. Most people can't aim? I mean, you don't even have to aim, though. It collates people. Like, you just aim in the middle of the clump, and you'll just get value with this at this point. Like, people go Moonstone with it, and it just passively works. The other 2 that we have to do that aren't on this list are Greatsword and Flail. Greatsword's in a spot where it's basically fully cut. Moonstone is trolling less damage than Ellie Gem. Yeah, it is kind of trolling because of that, because people do so much thrust resist because Spear is so good. I mean, the average musket user is abysmal, but some servers have some musket void demons. Yeah. Like, if you have a good musket, oh, I should have deleted that actually in hindsight. Oh yeah, I can get rid of it. I can add it back. Like, if you have a good musket, this feels like a maybe OP stats. Like, it could range a lot between these 2, but for most people, I would say it's like an average build. It's just like certain people are just very good with it. Because community has connected me with some of the good people who helped me level up my own gameplay. At least I could do to give back. Hey, I appreciate it, man. I mean, that's the goal. That was the original goal. I think it's slipped a little bit as of recent. I feel a little bad of trying to make stuff, less hidden. That's why I do things like leak rosters that are older and take flack from that from some people. But hey, if it's an older roster, then stuff changes. Like, there's been like probably 5 to 6 spots on this roster that have changed, but this is like still the general idea of what's viable. within wars right now. Heck. Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't leak the top end rosters though, then the bottom end people just don't adapt because they don't have enough wars. Like you have to at a certain point if you want people to be competitive. If you're in the micro Discord, you're missing out. True. People are really helpful with there. There's a lot of builds. I need to actually go through some VOD reviews. Maybe I'll do that later today. No, no, not the roster leak. Oh no. Greatsword, I think, is completely outclassed by Spear, and if Spear didn't exist, it would be solid. It's also in a weird spot with Serenity. This weapon is probably in a very good category, and then without Serenity is like average to not viable. You VOD me a few times, definitely helped me a ton. Hey man, I'm glad. Yeah, if people want to post VODs, I'll probably go through that within today or tomorrow because there's a little bit of extra time. But Greatsword, I think right now is average. I'd say it's a little bit better than Void Gauntlet. Like if I could put Greatsword in a spot, it'd be like right where that yellow line is. Like it's a little bit better than Void Gauntlet, a little bit worse than Musket, but it's like it's viable. And then Flail, which this is a really bad L, is basically not viable. It's viable for 1 to 2 people in an entire army, and that's it. Flail is like the bottom of the bottom in terms of what's slotted within war right now. Greatsword is mainly used by light melee assassins. Light melee is in a terrible spot. Yeah. So like Flail is like down here with BB. Like if you were to put it in a spot, like if I were to draw this yellow line as in like where it would be, like Flail would be a little bit better than BB, I think. Because it just has really good utility. And like Best Friends transfers over. It's like one of the only weapons with a secondary effect that transfers over. But there's only 2 Flail slots in an entire war. Like it's not many. And I think it's just overall shit. Like Greatsword I'm rating higher than Flail, and I think there's less Greatsword slotted in a war than Flail, because Greatsword feels like it has more of an impact. Best Friends is goated. Yeah, Best Friends is like the main thing that makes Flail good. If it didn't have Best Friends that worked on when you swapped weapons, I would say it would be completely shit, but... Buff the musket, true. But at the same time, I'm scared. What's this chart about? Just started watching. I wanted to like rate weapons in terms of like where they stand within PvP right now, in terms of like mostly war, but also like taking into consideration OPR and stuff like that. So like Spear, Rapier, 2 best weapons in the game right now. You can't really go wrong with using either one of those in basically any build. Like probably don't go Spear Lifestaff, but like other than that, like it works. A Lifestaff I still think is basically mandatory. Like if you don't have a Lifestaff, you can't exist. Shirking Heels got nerfed enough to where you need the Lifestaff still. And there's not an alternative to that, as much as the devs are trying to make alternatives to that. It seems like it's not really working. But the Void Gauntlet and with the Flail, like both of them are not viable as AoE healers. Sword and Shield, very, very strong. Used as both a tank, used as a disruptor. Basically enables medium and heavy disruptors to die of light players alone. Great Axe is mostly strong because of Crippling Reap. I think if Sword and Shield got nerfed, Great Axe would just take over. Ice Gauntlet is situationally good in this meta because no one's running Greatsword, and Greatsword's the main counter to Ice Gauntlet because it could just go through Ice Shower without any regards to their life. Otherwise, Ice Shower basically carries Ice Gauntlet, and that's why it's good right now. Warhammer, mostly good for heavy attacks. Bow, if you're really, really good with it and you know the mechanics, it's very solid. If you don't know the mechanics, I'd say it's an average weapon. Firestaff is, I'd say, below average right now within like the war scene, but good within the OPR scene. The Pest build with disease is a lot less effective than it has been in the past, to the point where people are like basically cutting it because the disease just doesn't last long enough to be beneficial, and just overall doesn't feel like it counters healers as much anymore, which is why Lifestaff has also moved up a bit, I think. Musket, if you are good with it, Musket's the sleeper weapon of this patch. I think a lot of companies are afraid to slot a Musket. Like, Musket can carry harder than Bow by far if you have a good player. And it is really, really toxic and hard to deal with if it's a good player. But if it's not a good player, it could be really, really bad. And someone can hit the 10 deaths per 10 minutes. It could be really bad. Like, your Musket player will either end up with 20 deaths in a single war, or they'll end up with 0, and they'll end up with 20 kills, and there's no in between. Like, it just completely depends on the player. Musket can be a better clump killer than Bow. Changed my mind. It is a better clump killer. It's more annoying. Musket is meta on EU War roster though. Yeah, on NA it's not, but I think NA is behind. I think NA has been behind for a while, and it's not an exception right now. Void Gauntlet, weak, just because it can be dogged down very easily. Great Sword, weak, mostly because of Spear. If you go into Onslaught stance on Great Sword versus a Spear, you just die instantly. Because it gives you old rend, effectively, because it's in its own perk bucket with the effects, and that just deletes your health bar, like, immediately. So it's, like, very hard to go for heavy attacks with the Great Sword, and if you can't go for heavy attacks with the Great Sword, you can't play Great Sword. And then BB basically just not used at all. He went from the point of being able to counter a lot of builds to not being slottable to counter builds because it just doesn't do enough damage. Firestaff is basically strictly better than BB in almost every way, shape, and form because of net shot nerfs and whatnot. But, you know, going net shot into net shot's still a silly combo and it's still situationally good, especially with, like, Great Axe. Flail, Niche, Best Friends carries it by far. Hatchet is decent. Just kidding. It's not used at all. So, it's basically where PvP stands at the moment. It's like, nothing is, like, Omega broken besides Spear and Rapier, but, like, I guess that's kind of a lot. Like, Spear and Rapier are just used a lot within an army. Like, if you look at, like, the war roster and look at how many people are running Rapier, like, every single healer is running Rapier, every single bow is running Rapier, Spears are running Rapier. Like, it's a lot of them. Rapier is so easy to outplay, it's not broken, lol. I mean, like, you just can't, it just creates more distance, and you generate your stamina while you're using your abilities, right? So you can just use Rapier abilities and then win the stam war every single time. As well as you generate stam when you use, like, evade and stuff like that. I think Hatchet will change to Season 5. Yeah, I agree. I think Hatchet will change a lot. Hatchet might move up to being, like, very viable again. BB greater than Rapier with Musket. I don't disagree with that one in particular, but Musket's in a weird spot where it's like you can't really rate it specifically for those things because it's like you either go Musket with BB, you go Musket with Void Gauntlet, or you do it with Rapier and you just do less damage. But it's just significantly better when you do it with Void Gauntlet or you do it with BB, just because you just do more damage. And then next patch it, well, no, you can't go for Venom with Musket. Also, Venom just doesn't feel like it hits that hard in my opinion compared to those other options. The fact that BB didn't get buffed in Season 5 was wild. I agree. I feel like the devs really, really have been messing with BB, but they're also, like, afraid to buff BB. Because BB is one of those weapons that's like Musket, where it's like, it varies on a thin line between completely broken and not viable. Buff Dave, he speaks for the people. True. Dave is the home.